Well, welcome back to Elven Plot Armor, and here we are at the end of the High Elves. So here is the tier listing, and this has had a lot of community feedback and playtesting. So 90% of people agreed with the first cut, but for those that didn't, they left reasons, and thank you so much. I listened to those and I tested them, and some placings have changed. So thank you everyone. If you do have a disagreement with something, please just mention it in the comments. It's all about discussion so we can play the game better. The setup for the rankings is actually going to go from tier 1 all the way to tier 5, and I think this is very useful because it gives you the context of where we are in our story, in the campaign, and it actually shows the reason why units are great, because they either stay relevant or they fall off. So we're going to start at tier 1 and build our way up just like we would in a campaign. Also, the ranks that I've provided here, C tier is not bad. Okay, people get upset when their favorite unit is in SS+++. That's not how this works. I'll quickly explain here. S tier is overpowered. They could nerf this unit from several angles and it would still be something you get because it covers so many bases and does so well. A is just excellent. This is a unit that if you are absolutely pushed to the limit, this is what you would be depending on. You will get great results and longevity from this unit. B tier is solid. This is a unit that will probably still be relevant in the next tier and above. Typically it's able to punch up, is dependable, or just provides a role for something that you might need. C tier is usable, and this is not a dirty word. You can make this unit work to your advantage and become a great part of your army, but it will take more work, and you are foregoing the strongest units for doing this. This list is actually made for every difficulty. I realize that melee units will obviously perform better on the normal difficulties, but overall the optimal method of play is still range preference. It's a range meta, and all normal does is allow you more breathing room and wiggle room with more funds and military flexibility. The optimal method of play does not change between difficulties, you just get punished more for not being optimal. D is outperformed, and these are units that either are irrelevant by the time you get them, or they just have another equivalent that does what they do better. So let's start off at tier 1 with the base unit, and the best base unit in the entire game, the Archer. Everyone's heard it before. This is such a good unit. 180 range, this will do the majority of your killing. So going into the high elf strengths, what are they? Archers, spears, magic, and monsters. So if you don't know what you're doing with the high elves, if it's carrying a spear, a bow, has a first name, or is a monster, it's probably going to do good things for you. This is your anti-infantry unit. It's almost your anti-everything unit. This will perform amazingly, not just in the early game to carry you, but also in a crisis. You can raise them from anywhere without a barracks, and even into the mid game, they will still perform surprisingly well. More importantly is the next unit we'll get into does a great job of protecting these, so they will get to rank 7 and rank 9, get favourable wins on your lord, and they will still be able to perform well into the mid game. There's actually good argument that these guys flirt with S tier, but let's move on to the next unit, which is the Spearmen. Now, some people might think that this isn't so good because it's melee infantry, but I only play on legendary and I always use this unit. For people that are newer, I'd recommend for every 3 archers, hire 1 Spearman unit. There's 90 men in the unit, they carry a shield, and shields are excellent in this game. This is a silver shield, so 55% of arrows will be absorbed. This means having a unit of spearmen up front if the enemy archers are shooting into them, and that is a positive trade for you while your archers unload into theirs. Your archers will most likely outrange the enemy, so this is a great situation to be in. And most importantly, they make great use of martial prowess, which I do have to address here. This signature ability is incredibly good and incredibly potent. Essentially, any unit that has over 50% of its health will get 2 melee attack and 12 melee defense. So a unit that has better defensive stats will be able to maintain its 50% hit points, therefore making use of martial prowess for longer. High elf offensive infantry struggles because of their low hit points, as well as the archers tend to do a better job, but their defensive infantry are excellent, and this ability is largely the reason why. They do cost slightly more than archers, so instead of having 15 archers, if you sub out 4 of them and only have 11 archers and 4 spearmen, this will cost the army about 28 gold more, but this will give you 4 shields to shore up the flanks, and their anti-large spears will give some protection to cavalry. Just remember to keep your spearmen still and facing the enemy as they charge in. The characters you have available to you and your ability to micro and manage your battles will determine your mileage or whether you need these guys at all, but the reality is the job of melee infantry in a high elf army is to protect the archers, and these guys do a good job versus anything. The next unit is the Ranger, and it's going to fall under usable, but I'm going to first start off why you shouldn't use it. After the first level of research, it does basically the same damage, but hits a lot better and can traverse through forests. Ideally, if you have Spearmen engaged with someone, these guys come around the flank and chop someone up with their anti-infantry damage. It sounds great, but your archers are your anti-infantry in the High Elf army. The High Elves do not need infantry to attack infantry. You have the best archers at the game at your disposal, shoot them from afar, and instead use Spearmen to hold the lines. The only time I would ever recommend using these guys is with Imric or Eltharion, because you're likely to face goblins and Skaven slaves, and their spread out unit stance means that they can capture a lot of units, but other than that they will not last. They do have 90 men, which is nice, but those 9 men will fall very quickly, not only for their 24 melee defense, but also because they have no shield. If you start an Oath one, you'll be fighting a lot of Dark Elves or even High Elves, meaning that these guys are going to just simply eat the arrow fire, very quickly falling below their 50% prowess. Although archers are more efficient, you can use these guys as a flanking unit, but honestly the only reason why you really would bring them is because of their lower upkeep. One thing that never seems to be brought up is that they cost 100 more gold to hire in the first place. This means they take 8 full turns to deliver a benefit to you economically, and if the unit gets wiped out, you've missed out. And most importantly, this unit ages very badly. A Spearman with a shield, at least that shield will still block 55% of any type of projectile, regardless of the level. This unit does have its place as a poor man's line holder until your economy can be stabilized, i.e. for Imric. The only time I would honestly ever recruit these guys is turn 1, hire 3 of them, and then destroy the barracks turn 2. Next up we have the Archer in light armor, and here we have our first D rank outperformed unit, and the reason being is that why is your Archer needing protection when your Spearmen and heroes should be doing the job for him? Now this doesn't fall under counterproductive, but this is honestly just money down the drain for less tactical flexibility. Let me explain. In a 15 unit squad, if you have 4 basic Spearmen and 11 basic Archers, the build comes to 2.2 thousand, and you get 4 line holders which can block missiles and deal anti-large damage. 15 Archers in light armor cost $2,500, does not have any of the extra flexibility, and their ammo is exactly the same. This unit is investing money in value that you should never be realizing in a situation you never want to be in. This is a unit I can honestly say give it a miss and adjust your formations if you need. Now onto tier 2, and the top of it is the Noble, the almighty resource gatherer, but more importantly is also incredibly versatile on the battlefield. Not only does it replenish your troops, but if you pump points into melee defense, armor, and improve its staying power, this is an incredible line holder. The enemy will blob around it, and your archers can absolutely shred whatever gathers around it. While the global traits are often more preferable, it's not too much of a second prize, settling for frugal, prudent, or even honed, which will decrease your upkeep or boost your line holding units. I know that Eagle Mount looks really tempting, but having these guys as a line holder is excellent. They can really outperform, and the replenishment will help your army keep on pushing forward. However, they can deliver a lot of value on the Chariot or the Eagle, but mostly in the event that they have an artillery advantage or can outrange you. This is more of a risk against enemies like the Empire and Dwarves, which you're not likely to face. So unless you're really great with your micro, where you can deliver a lot of damage versus anyone if you're really good, again, I would recommend keep them on foot. You can have them temporarily leave the army, scouting up ahead, stealing some influence, and then coming back to the army. Also remember that whenever you sack a settlement, you can also steal influence on that same turn. Next we have the vaunted Lothern Seaguard without shields, and I'm quickly going to address that you should not be hiring this unit regularly. It requires the barracks, which you shouldn't really be building up at tier 2, and the upkeep is just simply unattractive. It's a combination of a Spearman and an Archer, which doesn't quite deliver either role quite as well. It's only got 68 men, so it doesn't hold the line as well, and it's got less range than the Archers, so at least in the initial stages, sticking with your discount army that is more specialized will yield a much greater return. So why is a more expensive unit which doesn't pay off in the A tier? Well, it's not because of regular recruitment, it's because of global recruitment. For every 10 buildings of the exact same type that you own will reduce your global recruitment by 1 for any units that building produces. The regular Lothern Seaguard without shields can be recruited from ports, and because you live on a freaking island, there are ports everywhere, so once you control your 10th port, the recruitment time globally will go down to 1, and this becomes your go-to crisis unit, replacing your basic spears and archers. And let's remember that this unit has anti-large, can stand and brace to wash off cavalry charges, and essentially has the same ranged attack as basic archers, albeit with a slightly shorter range. It's an archer that can protect itself, which is great, and all it's missing is a shield, and we'll get to that later. So, should this unit form part of your main army? No. Is it great to raise in a crisis? Yes. Now we have the Ellyrian Reaver archers. In my opinion, this is by far the best cavalry unit the High Elves have at their disposal. It's fast, has Parthian shot so it can shoot behind, and can be vanguard deployed. Yes, it's not going to tangle very well and doesn't do so well cycle charging, but it can rat out the enemy, which is useful, but more importantly, in the garrisons that you might have, you can vanguard deploy it, and then when the enemy moves forward, leaving its artillery undefended, you can completely wipe its artillery out. The moment you remove the enemy's artillery, they must spend valuable turns besieging a walled settlement, slowing them down and allowing you the chance to regroup. The low hit points of the Elven cavalry makes it suffer a bit in the same way that the infantry does, but honestly, as far as they go, this actually delivers a decent cycle charge, if not to deal damage, but to damage the morale and be that last tipping point to make them break. The con is that the stable building is not a good one to have to pick and gets in the way of your more lucrative economic buildings. However, when you confederate or capture a province, if you're really into cavalry and this structure already exists, hire yourself a couple of Ellyrian Reavers, you only need 1 or 2, and then scrap the building the next turn. It's something you don't need to do, but if it's something you want to do, it will not hurt you in any way. Next up we have the Eagle, and in the older versions of the game I probably would have put this in D tier because there was an old building type where there was these guys, Lions of Chrace. It was pretty much called the recruitment center for outperformed units. However, they've now tied this to the Sisters of Avelorn in the New Woodlands, and now they are much more convenient to recruit because it's quite a sound strategy to have this structure poised and ready to go, so when you hit tier 4 that you can go straight for it and get Sisters and Handmaidens. So for a tier 2 monster, this is actually pretty good. It only has an upkeep of 200, so it's actually incredibly affordable for what it does. Where the Eagle shines is harassing enemy archer formations, being able to fly straight over the front line and then use their skirmishing to be able to push them away, stop them from firing, and then even attack them. However, 2 turns of recruitment and you probably won't have this slot available in the early stages. Many starting provinces will have a unique building. When you factor in public order, nobles, growth, you might be deferring this building and therefore deferring your access to Eagles a bit sooner, which increasingly hurts their relevance. For an early tier 2 unit they are awesome, but with only 30 armor and 30 melee defense, you'll be babysitting them before you know it. But some players get them early and get great returns on them. The final unit in tier 2, and I don't think there's any argument about this being the worst unit in tier 2, is clearly the Ellyrian Reaver without the bow. You manage to lose the bow, yes, you save some money, and in exchange you get plus 2 melee defense, taking you to a whopping 24 melee defense. This is a glass cannon without a shield and will probably get beat up by anything it charges into. If you ever see one, tell him to go away, get his bow, and then come back. The archer variation exists, only ever take that, never take this. Now we've reached tier 3, starting off with the most powerful unit in the entire High Elf roster. Yes, we're including heroes too, so we are talking about the Mage, more specifically the Fire Mage. Why is that? Well, first of all, fire magic is excellent. Second of all, she gets the Sun Dragon mount. So not only does this give you battle winning magic, it also gives you early access to a tier 4 beast. And fire magic is incredibly effective against most of the low level threats you'll face. Burning Head will punish the low HP of other elves, incinerate rats, and burn goblins to a crisp. Make sure at level 7 you put her on a horse and increase her mobility, and the extra damage you can do on horseback is worth it. You'll have plenty of points left over for Arcane Conduit and the high level spells before it, and of course to get yourself onto that Sun Dragon mount. The moment you hit tier 3 with any High Elf campaign, get yourself a Mage Tower. This unlocks tier 2 research, which is some of their most powerful, and of course gives access to this mage. The sooner you get her leveled up, the sooner she'll start winning all your battles pretty much by herself. I'm not even going to talk about the campaign buffs because she's actually S tier on the battlefield already. Feel free to take whatever school of magic you like, but just some friendly words of advice, only a fire mage gets the Sun Dragon mount, so my personal preference is that any battlefield mage I tend to have as fire, and opting to allocate other schools to Archmage Lords instead. Other star spells are Light Magic's Net of Amentok, and personally I'm quite against using regular mages as healers. Instead use Loremasters of Hoeth, max out Earthblood, and let them do your healing for you. Just keep in mind that different schools of magic are effective versus different matchups, and playing with a school of magic you're comfortable with also has its value. Next, under the A excellent tier, we have a unit that needs no introduction. In the initial release of the game, this was the signature high elf unit, the Lothern Seaguard with shields. That's right, it's got a spear, a bow, and a shield. Their only weakness is that their arrows are very much the same as the tier 1 archers, so they lack armor piercing. So they'll operate fine here, but they're only about a tier away from really starting to struggle to punch through things. Regardless of this point, if you don't have any of the DLC, this is the best archer available to you, and it is incredibly forgiving and easy to use. The biggest fear of most archer blocks is having cavalry flanked to the sides. These guys have a spear, so they're going to take a pretty good chunk out of whatever decides to run into them. Also, having a shield means that they can't be shot at front on. So here we have a basic one size fits all, able to cover all bases unit that you can spam into an unkillable checkerboard, at least at that stage of the game, but there is still one big issue, the armor piercing factor. But if you don't own any of the DLC, and this is the best archer you can get, then I fully recommend it. You'll have other means of dealing that armor piercing damage. This is pretty much the best line holder and archer in a single unit, so taking what you can get, this is pretty much something you can spam. However, if you do have the DLC, boy are these guys in trouble, and I never ever hire them. They deserve an A rank because of their flexibility and the fact you depend on them without DLC, but if you do have DLC, they are a B tier solid unit, and one that I never recruit because other units do both of its roles better for the exact same price. You are only one tier away from the Sisters of Avelorn, which deal armor piercing damage and are much better in melee. Moreover, remember, Lothern Seaguard fire the exact same arrows, but over less distance, and you've been a good general and you have protected your original archers, so they're now what, rank 5, rank 6? They are now firing longer and stronger, so you're now paying to replace them with units that, yeah, they can fight, but they shouldn't be getting in melee anyway, and they're now dealing less damage. And this unit takes 2 turns to recruit as well, so we're going to be spending a long time and a lot of money to raise an army, which is going to be obsolete in only one tier. This unit just comes about at a time where your original units are actually still serving you very, very well for half the price, so the Lothern Seaguard are just yet another casualty in the High Elf roster that the Sisters of Avelorn retired. This next entry into A ranking might surprise a few people, but here we have the Silverin Guard. Yes, we all know that melee is not an effective way to play, but at this stage of the game, melee infantry still have a role, and this is the best melee infantry in the entire High Elf roster, only taking 1 turn to recruit, 2 turns to globally recruit. The only real con is that it requires a barracks to build, but then again, so does the Lothern Seaguard. But here's a tip. Don't build a barracks, never build a barracks, but you will conquer several places where they will only have 1 settlement and they will have a tier 3 barracks. Simply hire the troops you want and then wreck the barracks. Now, this is not a unit that you spam. Do you remember those 15 units that we started with? We had 11 archers and 4 spears. Well, let's fire those spears and replace them with 4 Silverin Guard, and this will increase the upkeep of the army by about 350. As always, in a High Elf army, the job of the infantry is to protect the archers, and all we're doing is upgrading the protection so the flimsy archers have more room to breathe. Let those archers get up to rank 9, buff them with your lord, use favourable winds, and this army is still comparatively very cheap and will outperform and isn't too difficult to use. So why take these guys and not Lothern Seaguard? Because Lothern Seaguard can shoot, right? Well, we've already agreed that their arrows are going to be less effective fairly soon, so we'd be getting them for a line holder purpose. But the Silverin Guard have a 90-man unit versus the 68-man unit of the Lothern Seaguard. They do cost the same, however they will actually do their job of holding the line. They have charge defense against everything, have strong magic resistance, deal about 25% more damage in melee, and of course they'll hold that martial prowess for much longer, meaning they're fulfilling their role as a line holder. Sisters of Avelorn take 2 turns to recruit locally, but these guys take only 2 turns to recruit globally, so you can locally recruit half a stack of sisters and then globally recruit 3 or 4 of these guys on top to quickly raise an effective stack. The way I manage this is just to have a single tier 3 barracks in my entire empire, and I'll globally recruit from that. Shields are excellent in this game, blocking 55% of all damage, and if you want the shielded version of Lothern Seaguard, that's going to take 3 turns to recruit globally. As a unit to protect and get more life out of your early game units, a unit that acts in the mid game that punches up, and one that can be recruited globally pretty conveniently. This is an excellent infantryman and the best in the entire roster, and pretty much makes all the upcoming infantry irrelevant. Next up under the Solar category, we have the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower, the only artillery in the entire High Elf roster, and it's pretty good. Honestly, it's definitely not an A tier piece of equipment, and some people put it in A tier because it's the only one they get and they need it, but here's the deal. They don't need it. As soon as you get dragons or monsters, even as mounts, you gain Siege Attacker, therefore not requiring a Bolt Thrower. Some people prefer these because they can perform well in sieges, but at least in Warhammer 2 you can just bum rush the walls and use your superior archers to blast them off the walls and then take the walls to rain arrows in. This unit is built at the workshop building chain, which is only used for this unit and chariots, and unless you like chariots, I simply avoid this building. In my eyes, it just simply isn't worth foregoing economy or boosting your hero caps. Even before you can get access to monsters, you can just use the Invocation of Vol, which gives your armies all Siege Attacker, which lasts for 10 turns, but many of the legendary lords start with a Siege Attacker. Teclis has a Bolt Thrower, Alariel has her Treekin, Imric has a Sun Dragon, anyone can get a Sun Mage on a Fire Dragon. There is good arguments for bringing this unit, but the need for a Siege Attacker I just don't buy as one of them. You're not going to be spending many turns at all besieging settlements because you'll have Siege Attacker for a good part of the game. Now just to clarify, all of that is just explaining that you don't need this unit. However, it is still a good unit. It has two firing types, one is anti-large and good against giants, and the other one is a spray which hits multiple units, and honestly just use this one. The internet is completely right with this. This just simply does more damage and actually does quite well against armored infantrymen, especially if they have shields, which your archers of course hate. If you're a defensive player and want these in your firebase, absolutely use them, they're a good choice. Next up, we have the Tyranoc Charriot, the only chariot I would ever recommend, and similar to the Ellyrian Reavers, it's great because it has a ranged attack. Now, this also has a fair bit of punch and melee in terms of cycle charging. Chariots are a good unit all round because they have a lot of mass. They don't get tar pitted in units quite as easily as cavalry. They do require a lot of micro, so if you're a newer player, take one at most, maybe two at absolute most, but these are much better if you're looking for a cycle charging unit. They're also much more conducive to life magic because you can heal them and there's only 3 entities in there, so they'll be able to be healed up. And if you have built that workshop, yep, you could do a lot worse than this. Again, this is one of those units that you only need 1 or 2 in the army, but if you want 1 or 2, it can pull its weight. Next, we have the Shadow Warrior, and this unit can do a lot. It can stealthily move around, it can fire while walking, and basically kite the enemy away and shred them from a distance. Now, the issue is that they come around about tier 3 and they suffer in the same way Lothern Seaguard do. They are about to become very, very outclassed and very irrelevant. First of all, the enemy armor is going to be increasing and their arrows are not. Second of all, those big sister Avelorn, they are going to come in and completely dump on these guys and leave them out of a job. It's worth noting here that they are a signature unit for Ithilmar and he can boost them to become an A tier unit. This is just the standard rating, and of course use your intuition to realize that the buffs that you put on these units will make them perform at a higher level. For Ithilmar, you can definitely get legs out of these guys. But in a general high elf army, these guys will work okay in tier 3, but they will really start to taper off. So they're a solid unit, a usable unit. If you're looking for a unit halfway between cavalry and archers with a bit of mobility, this unit is a great contender, and it still is a B tier solid unit. It just struggles through the noise. Now into the C tier, the usable units, and we have the almighty White Lions of Chrace. Again, these guys used to have their own unique building, and it's been integrated into the Sisters of Avelorn building chain, which is great. The issue these guys have is twofold. One, they don't fit into the optimal way High Elves play. High Elves are not an offensive infantry countercharge army, that's more of a dark elf thing. The problem these guys have is that they're about to be outclassed by Sisters of Avelorn, and quite honestly, you don't need anti-infantry in this army. However, they are a good source of armor piercing. If you did want these, again hire 2. Have them in your second row behind your spearmen, allow those spearmen to be engaged, and then flank these guys around and absolutely shred the enemy. The issue is they don't have a shield and their defensibility isn't going to be that great, and they honestly just struggle. If you want a balanced unit which fires arrows, you have Lothern Seaguard. If you want a really great melee infantryman that holds the line, like High Elves should, you have the Silverin Guard. But if you're absolutely set on these guys, you can bring a couple. Their biggest issue is they only really shine for maybe a 15 turn period in the game before they start to be outclassed or become a huge risk to enemy projectiles. Still, there are honestly some very rare moments I do use these guys. In a crisis, you might have a woodlands that you're leveling up to get Sisters of Avelorn, and these guys might be recruitable. If you're versing an armoured enemy, these guys are going to be a much better choice than Spearmen and Rangers. We're talking a very small window, and if things are going well for you, you just aren't going to use these guys. Next up is the Lions of Chrace. Now, there's a lot of fanfare for these guys. They are very fast, they can do some good damage and are excellent for ratting down enemy units, but the problem we have is that they're not going to have a lot of legs. As the campaign goes on, they're going to be diving into things with some serious armor piercing potential. They take 2 turns to recruit, but to realize the return on that investment, they need to be able to punch up to the tier above it as well, and they just don't do that. This unit can dart around and terrorize archers, but we have other choices here, some of them which have ranged attack themselves or can just fly straight over and deliver this. This is a usable unit, feel free to hire 1 or 2, but it's not something I would typically recommend. I'm going to address both versions of the next entry together. We have the Silverhelm in its shielded and non-shielded versions. And the shielded version will put as usable. If you really want, you can use this, and facing front on, the shield will block 30% of incoming projectiles, so it at least has that going for it. Cavalry typically isn't a high performer in this game, and let's say this is a middle of the run cavalry, but it sure as hell is better than the non-shielded version. Never ever take the non-shielded version, that is D, outperformed, don't ever take that. If you're really into cavalry, you can take these guys, but honestly the Tyranoc Charriot will probably provide more value for you. Moreover, around this tier you either want to be having better defenders or more armor piercing damage, and this doesn't offer you either. Almost there now, reaching tier 4, and we are now in the S tier. Of course, it is the Sisters of Avelorn. This unit needs no introduction, so I'm just going to go into why it is so good. In the initial cut of the game, this was never included, so it is a DLC unit. Without this unit, the Lothern Seaguard were basically the best shielded unit and the best archer that they had available. And then these ladies came along, providing the armor piercing, which was typically the big weakness and Achilles heel of the High Elf army. In most armies, ranged is typically the preferred way to remove infantry blobs, and now you have a way of doing this with armor piercing damage. Moreover, this unit actually can perform very well in melee. Now, I have mentioned that in the early stages you might be able to use Silverin Guard to back these girls up, and I still do recommend that. In your main armies or when you're trying to crisis recruit, Sisters of Avelorn still take multiple turns to recruit, so you might want to globally recruit some Silverin Guard or Lothern Seaguard without shields if you only have 1 turn. Spear units get buffed by the hero trait Honed, which unfortunately doesn't benefit the Sisters of Avelorn. However, they do benefit from the resistant trait, which is available from Handmaidens, which provides an army-wide buff to missile resistance as well as melee defense, and yes, this does stack. Depending on your playstyle will depend on how long you need to lean on melee infantry for, but there is certainly a point where you will accumulate enough influence through either time or cheesing the game and exploiting it. You'll be able to farm through whichever hero traits you want, meaning you can farm multiple Handmaidens with a resistant trait to make an unstoppable army of Mary Sues that are good at everything, on top of their research, which is already pretty generous to them. So by the time you reach the late game, yes, those spear units won't be needed at all, as well as your hero caps will be enough, so if you really want to, you can effectively be rocking nothing but characters, Sisters of Avelorn, and maybe some flying monsters. If this unit got nerfed in upcoming versions or just got an upkeep increase, it would not surprise me at all. You'll want lots of its building chain because this will increase your Handmaiden cap, meaning that this will be available, and eventually your global recruitment time will start to creep down to 1 per turn in the very late game. It can defend itself in melee, it has great range, meaning it's very useful in sieges, and it's one of the best units in the entire game. You'll always want them in Ellyrian's army because she has unique buffs for them via one of her special trees. One boosts tree spirits, the other one boosts this unit, as well as our next addition, which is the Handmaiden, which is an A tier unit with some strong argument towards S, but I am trying to keep this in the context of being a battlefield focused video. Although I'll quickly note here, it can get the entrepreneur trait, the famous cheesy money exploiter, and get some excellent faction wide bonuses, including boosting public order, and a couple of these in New Province can use their stimulate growth to really power level it. In your armies, they can replenish, though they can't quite hold the line like the noble would. They're a ranged unit, so throw them on a horse and let them fire arrows shooting down enemy heroes, which does actually have its place. Her unique ability is to provide more pushback on arrows, or she can take the entangle ability, basically a poor man's net of Ammontok, pinning enemy units in place for your archers to shred. Next in the A tier is the most overlooked hero in the entire High Elf roster, and that is the Loremaster of Hoeth. And these guys are awesome, boy are they overlooked, and I think the reason why they're overlooked is because they are underwhelming on the campaign map. Or more than underwhelming, they really don't do jack. And this is why they are so useful. Follow me here. You want mages. Mages are excellent. Fire mages can win battles by themselves in your armies, and any other slots you can just hire them as entrepreneurs to power up the income of your entire empire. So you want as many tier 4 mage towers as possible to increase your cap of mages, but for every mage you get, you also get one more Loremaster of Hoeth. These guys also provide an excellent line holder. If you wanted to put your nobles on chariots or eagles, this is the time to do it. You could even leave them on foot, but you will have Loremasters of Hoeth now in the front row protecting your units, and they are excellent for this. Not only are they good, a small unit that enemies can blob around and let your archers shred, they can also heal. Your first stop should always be get 3 points in Earthblood. I can't stress how good this is. You will finish your battles stronger than when you started them, because Earthblood is just an incredible spell for being able to just blob your infantry up post-battle and heal them up. Same as monsters. I know everyone talks about regrowth because it's a great way to power up the hit points of a single unit, but honestly, I call it the group hug. At the end of your battle, get all of your large single entities, your dragons, your heroes, put them together, get them to hold hands, and just keep casting Earthblood over and over, and you'll get them up to their hit point cap. You only need one Loremaster to do this, but you will have enough Loremasters for every single army you have, so your characters and large monsters will never ever die. This is excellent for filling a line holder role, as well as a healer role. It can help generate winds of magic, and has some other nice spells to boot. A tier all the way. Next up we have the Sun Dragon and Moon Dragon, and I'm going to discuss both of these together because you obviously unlock them around the same time, and their effectiveness more depends on what you are trying to attack at that time. My preference leans towards the Sun Dragon, which has a longer breath area and it's fantastic against rats, goblins, anything that's lightly armored. However, against high armor targets like Chaos, any elite infantry, the Moon Dragon is going to perform much better with its high armor piercing breath attack. At this stage I definitely would not be doom stacking dragons, probably just adding 1 or 2 into your army to basically fill that flanking role. In terms of recruitment, this is where we start to see some of the limitations. They take 3 turns to recruit locally, and they're so expensive it is undesirable to globally recruit these guys. But the bigger issue tends to be that their building competes with other slots, and these other build slots will be things like, for example, the Noble Court or the Woodlands to increase your nobles or handmaidens. Of course, the highest priority, which is typically Mage Towers to increase your mages and Loremaster count, and anything else you often want to boost your economy or growth. Now, you can use a prince with the Dragon Wield trait, which will decrease the recruitment time by 1 as well as make them cheaper, so you can actually walk a prince out who has recruited a stack of dragons and then just distribute them amongst your armies. That's always an option, but the aforementioned building conundrum means you're often going to be best off siding with either completely dragons or completely phoenixes, especially in your main province at this stage of the campaign. And the choice doesn't really matter which way you go, pick the unit that you can make perform better for you. I myself do prefer dragons, but they do require a bit more micro. Check out my Dragon Mastery Guide if you would like to get more out of your breath attacks, because this largely determines the amount of mileage you'll get out of your dragons. If you struggle with breath attacks, then honestly the Phoenix are much easier to use and you can get great mileage out of them too. So let's just jump straight into the next entry, the Flamespire Phoenix and the Frostheart Phoenix, and there's actually a lot more difference between these two than there is the 2 dragons. Similar to the Sun and Moon Dragon, the Flaming variant is a bit more agile, a bit weaker, a bit faster, and the Wake of Fire bombardment allows it to dump down 3 separate bombardments, which is quite good against low level units. Conversely, the Frostheart Phoenix has its debuffs and is going to be more useful against higher level units, but once again it comes down to whatever you're versing. I know that it shouldn't be a competition because all 4 of these units have their own time and place, but the problem is that when you do get to tier 4, you're only likely to have 1 build slot that you would want to dedicate to this, because tier 4 is when your other buildings, once upgraded, will increase your hero cap. So this is quite an important time for your other buildings, and of course more heroes, especially with a faction with such powerful characters as the High Elves, should always be your highest priority. And there's probably many players out there that don't even build the shrine or the dragon keep to hire phoenixes or dragons respectively. Certain lords like Teclis will need the shrine because he starts with a lot of corruption, and the shrine does have the advantage that it does lower corruption. So that's a notable point in the corner of Phoenix users. And by the time you get to tier 5, you'll certainly have space for one or both of these buildings, but at this stage you're probably only going to want to dedicate one, so I recommend making a choice based on what you yourself are most comfortable with. All 4 of these units are almost identical. They are your flanking mobile unit. You only want a couple in each army. Definitely not worth doom stacking because whilst your economy is probably burgeoning, just a few of these to support your Sisters of Avelorn is going to be all you really need. There's no point inflating your upkeep unless, once again, you just want to have fun with that, but we're talking about efficiency and overall power here, and all 4 of these are excellent B tier solid units. Next up we have one of my favourite units in the entire game, the Swordmasters of Hoeth, and you would think these guys would be freaking excellent, especially before they released the Sisters of Avelorn. These guys were one of your few sources of reliable armor piercing damage. Well, now they have to compete with the Sisters of Avelorn, but once again they are an expensive melee infantryman. They take multiple turns to recruit, and they've only got 75 models as opposed to Silverin Guard, which have 90. They will get surrounded as soon as that charge bonus does wear off. As soon as they go below 50% health, the lack of martial prowess is really going to hurt them. They just do not stick around long enough to do what you need them to do. At this stage of the game in tier 4, you need something to be able to stick around as well as deal decisive damage, and whilst they can do some decisive damage and tangle one-on-one very well with other units, that's not the situation you are likely to find yourself in. By tier 4 you are able to get multiple heroes and have monsters now to deal the heavy damage for you. The High Elf buffs are conducive to defensive infantry, not offensive infantry. Their role is to protect the archers, but if you are absolutely set on using these guys, you can have 1 or 2 in your army, have them behind your front line, allow them to come around the flanks and then deal some decisive damage. Again, you have Sisters of Avelorn to do this better, but if you do want to use these guys, you can use them to decent effect. In summary, these guys are a great unit that just doesn't quite fit into the team that they are a part of. And at tier 4, your star players really shouldn't be infantry, and especially in an army where your offensive infantry are not a strong point and your monsters are. Last up in tier 4, under D outperformed, we have both of the chariot options. We have the Lion Chariots of Chrace, as well as the Ithilmar Chariots, and we've just finished talking about 4 amazing monster creatures which can all fly and achieve the role better than these things. If you have to make a choice between the two, I would certainly go with the Lion Chariots. They are more expensive, but they just pack more of a punch and are overall going to be more reliable. But it's again at a point where this is an anti-infantry unit in an army that really doesn't need anti-infantry units and is outclassed by better flying alternatives. Neither of these chariots have the ranged attack that the Tyranoc Charriot has, and if you're like me and don't even build the Elven Forge because you don't use bolt throwers, then you most likely won't even have these available. If you really want, the Lion Chariot in particular can deliver some nice armor piercing damage, but you just have to try to make it work in the face of better alternatives. Finally, tier 5, and we will be kicking off with probably the 2 biggest culprits for being in Doomstacks in a High Elf army, and they are the Arcane Phoenix and the Star Dragon. So starting off with the Arcane Phoenix, and it actually has a lot more fans than the Star Dragon. It's easy to use, faster, more nimble. Its vortex is very easy to use and drop down and can provide some great damage for you. There are several character traits which can buff this unit and it will just simply deliver. It is excellent at hunting down enemy lords and heroes and delivering some good damage. It's not too big so it can actually get away and just keep on cycle charging. If you want to make a doom stack of these things, you absolutely can. If you just want 1 or maybe 2 to support your army, it can do that too. It is an excellent unit. Now, moving on to the Star Dragon, this is my personal preference as to the 2 Doomstackable units, but maybe that's just comfort from playing as Imric for so long. But the choice between these 2 units for you is most likely going to come down to 2 things. Well, one is personal choice and based on what you're most comfortable with, which I do recommend being important. But in tier 4, did you build the Dragon Keep or did you upgrade your Shrine of Assyrian? If you're looking after your hero cap and economy, you most likely did not build both of these, so whichever one you build will determine the one you get first, and if you'd like to add either to your army, they are both excellent choices. The Star Dragon in particular is a big heavy hitter. It's a large giant monster, and if you don't know how to work these things, they will get shot down and not deliver their value. So if you're new with flying units, I would definitely steer you towards the Arcane Phoenix, just being honest. but once you get used to dragons, that breath attack can be really decisive, but it does take time and patience. So please check out my dragon guide if you are having any trouble with dragons. They are a bit of an art form. Most importantly, both of these units synergize very well with life magic, so getting that Loremaster of Hoeth with 3 stars in Earthblood to keep a group of these things alive is very important. And if you do want to have an Archmage of life, they will do very well with regrowth here. You'll get that value back. If you're the kind of person who runs a balanced army, you can have 1, 2, maybe 4, and have the rest of your army, the archer and spear corps that has maybe worked for you before. But this ultimately comes down to the way you want to play. You may have cheesed the economy so hard that you can afford multiple stacks of these. Like all dragons, it has siege attacker and performs very well in auto resolve. I'd like to preface, if I have to say which unit is better, I prefer Star Dragons, but being unbiased, I would have to say the point does go to the Arcane Phoenix. Skipping past the solid tier and straight down to usable, and a unit that's barely usable I would still class as the Phoenix Guard, the most elite infantry in the entire High Elf roster. What's so special about them? Well, they are the quintessential halberd unit, meaning they are the anti-large monster slayer in your ranks. Now, to the untrained eye, the Phoenix Guard would just look like the next step in the evolution of your infantry, and they would replace the Silverin Guard. I mean, look at them, they've got more armor, almost as good melee defense, significantly more melee attack, which means they'll be hitting far more with their weapon, which has far more armor piercing damage. Like the Silverin Guard, the Phoenix Guard also have charge defense against all, meaning if they stand and brace to face an incoming charge, they will ignore the charge bonus of everything, not just large units. So why is this not just a logical upgrade? Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, they've got no shield, and that is actually a bigger deal than it sounds. The Silverin Guard's shield allows them to block 55% of everything, including armor piercing weapons such as arrows as well as gunfire. Also, the unit size is only 75 versus the 90 units in the Silverin Guard, so they are a smaller lineholder unit. Each model does have far more health, but they've only got 200 health overall more than the Silverin Guard unit, albeit they will be defending themselves better with 100 armor. So even a marginal improvement's alright, isn't it? Well, not necessarily. Silverin Guard are only about 60% of the price, and we definitely don't see them this much lower in quality. But here's the crux of this, is that even at this point the Silverin Guard, which you maybe had 2 or 4 in each army, they are now starting to wind down because you've been building lots of mage towers to get more mages. You also have a lot of Loremasters of Hoeth, which are a single hero, which do an excellent job on the front line. Enemy troops will blob around them, which is just so conducive to all of the raining hell that your Sisters of Avelorn will deliver on things. You'll also have a lot more nobles kicking around, and you will have got all the influence you need. You will have several nobles free to join your ranks to bolster that replenishment and hold the line. So by virtue of having more heroes, you'll have less need for melee infantry because these guys will do it for you. So as a line holder, the Phoenix Guard failed to put the Silverin Guard severely out of a job at a time where the Silverin Guard are also being put out of a job. And this is double compounded by the fact you can also boost Sisters of Avelorn so much, and you will have the ability to get the traits on the heroes that allow you to do this. Essentially, this is the point where melee infantry largely become unneeded in the High Elf armies, by virtues of heroes and Sisters of Avelorn being able to take care of the melee duties themselves. And their large monstrous creatures, well, they don't need infantry to look after them. If you need melee infantry in a pinch, you can always globally recruit Silverin Guard just as quick, and you've probably built several woodlands for Handmaidens and Sisters of Avelorn, so you've probably got Sisters of Avelorn down to a single turn of global recruitment. These guys still do scrape in as usable because they are the premier halberd unit. If you had to face a massive monster spam or dragon spam, this would be the perfect line holder for it, so situationally they can be useful, and given that even though it's rare, the conditions and the right utility can make them usable, and they scrape in as such. Finally, we have the Dragon Princes, another very beloved unit which I really dig, but yeah, it does not perform well. It's got the same squishiness issues that other cavalry have in the High Elf roster, and it has pretty much the same relevancy issues that the Chariots in tier 4 have. They are competing against strong, high tier flying monsters, which is a massive strength of the High Elves because they're monsters and they can fly right over things. The problem with Dragon Princes as well is that they are slow. They are so heavily armored, they're able to cycle charge in. They don't have enough mass to push themselves out of every situation, and man, they just fall. They are really hard to keep alive. As soon as the combat gets prolonged, they can be buffed and can be made usable. Don't get me wrong there. The problem is that they are so far behind where they should be, especially when the same building gives you Star Dragons. This is honestly a unit that should be unlocked at tier 4 along with the dragons. That's just my personal opinion, and even then you probably wouldn't use it. And I don't think I'm going to get too much argument. You're not ruining your army by putting them in there, but boy, are you missing out on the sauce. Now to go to the faction specific units, let's first start up with Yvresse and their Mistwalker units, and these are excellent. And in my most recent Yvresse playthrough, I didn't actually build any of the Mistwalker builder chains. Once Altharion's done the various upgrades, you can hire these around the map. Being able to raise them like regiments of renown makes these an excellent crisis unit that you can have up your sleeve. Anytime, say, Skaven underway towards your holdings in the south, you can just simply raise a whole stack of these and they will absolutely wreck anyone that ever decided to get close to you. But in Altharion's army in particular, the Sentinels of Estoril have a devastating range of 215, but they fire very slow. Good thing is that Altharion can overcast his Hand of Glory, and this means one of his units can pretty much rapid fire away. It degrades their blocking ability, and you'll be able to shred them from afar. The best archer stack available to the High Elves is a competition between Alariel's Sister stack or Altharion's Sentinels of Astoril stack, and that's why that's in the S tier. Sitting next to it in the overpowered tier is the Knights of Torgaval, and you get these much later in the campaign, but man, they are good. These things are dragon slaying goodness. They just rip everything apart. Super good. Now, the common theme with these things is that they're all very expensive, and that is the biggest turn off with the Mistwalker units, but the Athel Tamara Faith Bearers in particular are 413 every single turn, which is just astronomically expensive and not really worth it. However, you can still summon them out of thin air, which puts them at a solid B tier. The unique archer units are at least A tier, and yeah, absolutely S tier for the Knights of Torgaval and the Sentinels of Astoril. Moving over to Ithilmar and Nagaryth, he gets the unique Shadow Walkers from his unique building chain. Now, you'll most likely only ever have the copy of this building in his capital, but these units that do take 2 turns to recruit, which in the early game might be a bit of a catch, but I myself always like to have 4 of these in my army because they are good in melee. Ithilmar's army is definitely one that's very conducive to spamming the shadow units, predominantly Shadow Walkers, because they are excellent in his army. And it is absolutely devastating even until the mid game, far more than it should be able to, because this is non-armor piercing damage. You would think this dates much sooner than it does, but I still believe the Shadow Walkers, despite taking 2 turns to recruit, are definitely a solid B tier unit. And just remember that Ithilmar has the Shadow unit buffs, and he can make them operate at an A tier level, especially in the early game. Next up, we have the Knights of Caledor and the unique legendary dragons that Imrig must catch through his campaign, and of course these are S tier overpowered. Snapping your fingers and having a doom stack of 5 dragons added to any army is going to have some bites. This used to be absolutely broken, and they used to have no cooldown so long as you disbanded them and they didn't die, but now Imrig has to play by the rules, which I guess is fair enough. They take 10 turns to recover between being disbanded or defeated, but still, having them up your sleeve is excellent, and they are an S tier unit through and through. Last up, we have Avelorn and the unique Tree Spirit units, and these are nice and fun, but they do have a few notable catches. Firstly, they can only be recruited from that one building. There are 3 units, basically at any stage get outclassed in terms of cost effectiveness or battlefield potential by other High Elf infantry that are also available. Treemen are cool, but again, they don't operate as well as they would with the Wood Elves. They just don't get buffed easily, and the only way to buff them is in Alariel's army. The biggest catch of all is that to buff these units, you have to forego her amazing tree, which gives her the ability to hire Handmaidens from any province, also providing 2 more Handmaidens, as well as reducing the recruitment time of Sisters of Avelorn. Anytime you pit one unit against the Sisters of Avelorn, it has one glaring problem, is that it isn't Sisters of Avelorn. Now, are they useless? Well, not entirely. You can make themed armies, you can put them in her army, and they will perform quite well. Also, I will note, the tree folk that starts in her army, keep that. That has siege attacker and will really speed up your early game with Avelorn. And that takes us to the final end of this tier list. Thank you so much for sticking around, and I hope you've enjoyed the tier by tier progression, which really shows the story to all the units, to what this faction actually needs, how it evolves, how the world around it evolves, and basically where you need to take your military and steer your army. Personally, in my own campaigns, I only play on Legendary difficulty, and I can quite soundly say that the S tier and A tier are units that are high in every single campaign, except for the Lothern Seaguard. I don't usually hire either of those, and I typically prefer Star Dragons over Arcane Phoenix, but like I said, I think the Arcane Phoenix is probably a better overall unit. All of the faction exclusive units are all excellent, and you should always use those, with the exception of Avelorn. In my opinion, they're not worth it. And in the B tier, you'll find lots of units of convenience. Most of the units in here are great utilities, which can be added in small amounts to your army. Again, the S tier is not a Doomstack tier. This is just high quality units, and as we go down on the harder difficulties, I can soundly say I do avoid the C tier, and certainly never ever touch the D tier. And that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I know this has been a long one, but I really hope that you found this interesting. I think it was a different approach to tier lists, and if you're a new player, I hope this maybe gave some context and maybe was at least entertaining to watch. Let me know if you like the format. At the end of each series of guides, there will be a tier list for each race. Please consider liking and subscribing, it really helps us out. And this has been Elven Plot Armor. I will see you next time. Cheers.